Hey everyone, comment where you're watching from today. Now let me tell you a story about how sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. In the pristine suburban community of Oak Ridge Estates, where manicured lawns stretched like green carpets and white picket fences stood like sentinels of conformity, the morning sun cast long shadows across Marcus Sterling Thompson's newly purchased home. The retired Marine Corps veteran had poured his life savings and military pension into this two-story colonial, a testament to 20 years of service to his country. Little did he know that his American dream was about to collide with an unseen enemy, the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Marcus stood in his driveway that crisp autumn morning, his military straight posture unchanged by civilian life, admiring the fresh coat of navy blue paint he'd meticulously applied to his home's exterior. The color reminded him of the dress blues he'd worn with pride during his service, a choice he'd made carefully to honor both his past and his future. But to Beverly Davis, the HOA president watching from her window across the street, it was nothing short of a declaration of war. The conflict began with a letter, innocent-looking enough in its crisp white envelope, but carrying within it the first salvo of what would become a bitter battle. "Dear Mr. Thompson," it read, "your recent exterior modifications are in violation of the HOA covenant, which strictly mandates approved colors within the earth tone spectrum. Immediate remediation is required." Marcus read the letter twice, his weathered hands steady despite the anger building within him. He checked the guidelines, filed the proper paperwork, and even attended the board meeting where his color choice had been discussed. He had followed every rule to the letter, just as he'd been trained to do throughout his military career. What Marcus didn't know was that behind closed doors, Beverly Davis had orchestrated an emergency meeting of the HOA board. "Property values," she'd insisted to the other members, her voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "We must think of the community's standards." But what went unsaid in that meeting spoke volumes about the real reason behind her sudden crusade. The next few weeks brought a barrage of violations, each more ridiculous than the last. His American flag was improperly displayed, despite his strict adherence to flag code. His well-maintained garden was cited for non-conforming vegetation. Though it matched his neighbor's layouts, even his Silver Star Memorial plaque, a testament to his valor in combat, was deemed unauthorized ornamentation. But Marcus Sterling Thompson hadn't earned his decorations by backing down from a fight. He attended every HOA meeting, documentation in hand, speaking with the same quiet dignity that had earned him respect from his fellow Marines. Yet each time, Beverly Davis and her allies found new ways to dismiss his arguments, their tactics becoming increasingly aggressive. The situation reached a boiling point when Marcus received a certified letter threatening eviction. The HOA claimed accumulating fines and violations had triggered their right to initiate foreclosure proceedings. The community buzzed with whispered conversations, some residents watching from behind curtained windows as Marcus stood in his driveway, reading the letter with the same stoic expression he'd worn in combat. That's when Lisa Wallace, his next-door neighbor, decided she'd seen enough. A local journalist with a nose for injustice, she began documenting every interaction, every citation, every carefully worded rejection of Marcus's appeals. Her trained eye saw what many had chosen to ignore, a pattern of targeted harassment, hiding behind bureaucratic procedure. As autumn crept toward winter, Marcus's story caught the attention of local veterans groups. Marine Corps flags began appearing in nearby yards, a silent show of solidarity that infuriated Beverly Davis and her cohorts. But it was Lisa's careful documentation that finally reached the right desk, landing in front of someone who could actually do something about it. That someone was Usha Vance. The young attorney had built her reputation taking on cases of housing. discrimination, and something about Marcus's story struck a chord. When she arrived at his house for their first meeting, she found him in his garden, tending to flowers that somehow thrived despite the Ohio autumn. His hands, which had once guided aircraft through combat zones, now carefully pruned roses that Beverly Davis had cited as invasive species. "Mr. Thompson," Usha said, extending her hand, "I believe we have some work to do." Marcus looked up, noting the determination in her eyes that reminded him of the best officers he'd served with. "Ma'am," he replied, rising to his full height, "I've been fighting battles my whole life, but this is the first time I've felt like I'm fighting alone." Usha smiled, opening her briefcase to reveal hundreds of pages of carefully organized documents. "Well, that ends today, Mr. Thompson, because what the Oak Ridge Estates HOA doesn't know is that they've done more than just harass a homeowner. They've created a paper trail that's going to be their undoing." As Marcus invited her inside, Beverly Davis watched from her window, unaware that her carefully constructed campaign was about to meet its match. Because while she had been building her case on paint colors and garden regulations, Usha Vance had discovered something far more damning in those seemingly routine violations. What happened next would not only change Oak Ridge Estates forever, but would serve as a wake-up call to HOAs across the country. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from where you expect it. Sometimes it comes from a young attorney with a stack of papers and an unwavering commitment to what's right. But that's just the beginning of this story. A story about how one man's fight for his home became a battle for something much bigger, the right to be treated with dignity in the country he'd risked his life to defend. Because while Marcus Sterling Thompson had faced enemies in combat, he was about to learn that the hardest battles are sometimes fought right at home, in the quiet streets of suburban America, where discrimination hides behind bylaws and prejudice, masquerades as property values. As the sun set over Oak Ridge Estates that evening, neither Marcus nor Beverly Davis could have predicted how their confrontation would escalate, or how Usha Vance's involvement would uncover a pattern of behavior that would shock the community to its core. But that's a story for our next chapter, where we'll see just what happens when someone finally stands up to say, enough. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. And if you thought this was intense, wait until you see what Usha discovered. In those HOA meeting minutes, sometimes the biggest revelations come from the smallest details, and in this case, those details were about to blow the whole thing wide open. Remember to like and subscribe to catch the next part of this incredible story. And let us know in the comments, have you ever dealt with an unfair HOA? We want to hear your stories too. The morning after Usha Vance's arrival at Oak Ridge Estates, the community hummed with an electric tension. Word had spread quickly through the manicured streets that someone had finally taken up Marcus Sterling Thompson's cause, and the reactions were as divided as the neighborhood itself. For every resident who breathed a sigh of relief that justice might finally prevail, there was another who worried about what changes might come to their carefully controlled community. Beverly Davis sat in her home office, surrounded by meticulously organized HOA files, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the mahogany desk. The arrival of Usha Vance had thrown a wrench into what should have been a simple matter of enforcement. She reached for her phone, dialing a number she'd hoped she wouldn't need to use. "Andrew Pierce," she spoke into the receiver, addressing the HOA's longtime legal counsel. "We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." The lawyer had helped the association navigate numerous challenges over the years, but something in Beverly's voice suggested this was different. Meanwhile, Usha Vance had transformed Marcus's dining room into a makeshift legal command center. Spread across the solid oak table that had been in his family for generations were hundreds of documents, HOA meeting minutes, violation notices, correspondence, and property records dating back decades. Lisa Wallace, the journalist next door, had provided her own extensive documentation, including photographs and recordings of HOA meetings that painted a disturbing pattern. "Mr. Thompson," Usha said, adjusting her glasses as she examined a particularly telling set of documents, "did you know that in the past 5 years, every single major violation citation has been issued to either minority homeowners or military veterans?" Her finger traced down a list of names and dates, each entry adding another piece to a damning puzzle. Marcus stood at parade rest, a habit he'd never quite broken, looking over her shoulder. "Ma'am, I suspected something wasn't right, but I didn't have access to those records." "That's by design," Usha explained, pulling out another folder. "The HOA has been particularly creative in how they've structured their documentation. On the surface, everything looks procedural, but when you dig deeper..." She spread out a series of violation notices, each worded slightly differently, but achieving the same discriminatory outcome. The investigation had uncovered a sophisticated system of selective enforcement. While white homeowners received gentle reminders about minor infractions, minority residents faced immediate fines and escalating penalties. Veterans, particularly those with visible symbols of their service, were subjected to Byzantine regulations about exterior decorations that seemed to exist solely to target their military honors. Across the street, Beverly Davis was holding an emergency meeting with key HOA board members in her living room. Paul Hansen, the treasurer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Beverly outlined their position. "We've done nothing wrong," she insisted, her voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who'd convinced herself of her own righteousness. "Everything we've done is in the covenant." "But Beverly," Paul interjected, his conscience finally finding its voice, "what about the Thompson case? The color he chose was within the approved range. We voted on it." "The vote was procedurally flawed," Beverly countered smoothly, but her eyes carried a warning. "And we have a responsibility to maintain community standards." What Beverly didn't know was that Paul had been wrestling with his conscience for weeks. Later that evening, he made a decision that would change everything. He walked across the street to Marcus's house, carrying a thick manila envelope. "Mr. Thompson," Paul said, his voice trembling slightly as Usha answered the door alongside Marcus. "There's something you need to see." Inside the envelope were private HOA board emails, documenting conversations that were never meant to see the light of day. Usha spent the night reviewing the new evidence, her commitment to justice growing. With each damning page, the emails revealed a coordinated effort to use the HOA's authority to systematically drive out residents who didn't fit Beverly Davis's vision of an ideal community. The next morning, Marcus was tending to his garden, an act of quiet defiance against the latest violation notice when he noticed increased activity at Beverly's house. A string of luxury cars arrived, disgorging suits who carried briefcases and worried expressions. The HOA was circling its wagons, but they weren't the only ones mobilizing. Lisa Wallace had been busy too, connecting with other journalists and residents from neighboring communities. Similar patterns emerged, veterans and minorities facing unusually harsh enforcement, selective application of rules, and systematic pressure to conform or leave. John McCarthy, a retired Air Force colonel from 2 streets over, arrived at Marcus's house with his own stack of documentation. "They tried the same thing with me last year," he explained, showing violation notices that mirrored Marcus's. "I gave in and painted my house their approved shade of beige. Been regretting it ever since." As more residents came forward, Usha began to see the full scope of the situation. This wasn't just about one man's house color or garden choices. It was about a systemic abuse of power that had gone unchecked for years, protected by the very bylaws meant to ensure community harmony. Beverly Davis watched the growing parade of visitors to Marcus's house with mounting concern. She called an emergency board meeting, but this time, the usual unanimous support she enjoyed showed cracks. Board members who had rubber-stamped her decisions for years began asking uncomfortable questions. "The thing about discrimination," Usha explained to Marcus as they reviewed the mounting evidence, "is that it often hides in plain sight. It's in the small decisions, the subtle differences in enforcement, the accumulated weight of 1,000 small injustices." Marcus nodded, thinking of his years in the Marine Corps. "In the service, ma'am, we had a saying, leadership is a privilege, not a right. Seems like some folks here forgot that." The situation reached a new level when Aaron Sanders, a local civil rights activist, got wind of the story. He organized a peaceful demonstration outside the HOA's monthly meeting, bringing media attention that Beverly Davis had desperately hoped to avoid. Inside the meeting, Beverly tried to maintain control, but the atmosphere had shifted. Residents who had previously sat in silent compliance now stood to speak. Mary Reed, who had lived in the community for 30 years, shared her own experiences of selective enforcement. Michael Washington, a recently moved-in doctor, presented data showing the disproportionate impact of HOA policies on minority homeowners. Usha sat quietly through it all, taking notes and building her case. When Beverly tried to adjourn the meeting early, Usha finally stood. "Before we conclude," she said, her voice carrying the weight of carefully assembled evidence, "I'd like to present some findings that the board needs to address." For the next hour, Usha methodically laid out her case. She showed how violation notices were issued at different rates based on homeowners' race and veteran status. She presented evidence of board members using private email chains to coordinate harassment campaigns against undesirable residents. She demonstrated how property improvement requests were handled differently depending on who submitted them. The room sat in stunned silence as the pattern became undeniable. Beverly Davis's face remained impassive, but her hands, clutching her designer handbag, betrayed her tension. "This isn't just about Mr. Thompson's house color," Usha concluded. "This is about the systematic abuse of HOA authority to discriminate against residents based on race and veteran status. Both are protected classes under federal law." The implications hung heavy in the air. Several board members exchanged worried glances. Andrew Pierce, the HOA's lawyer, was frantically taking notes, his usual confidence replaced by obvious concern. Outside, the demonstration had grown. Local news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers. Lisa Wallace moved through the crowd, gathering statements and documenting the moment for posterity. Marcus stood at the back of the meeting room, his military bearing unchanged despite the emotional weight of the moment. He wasn't just fighting for his home anymore. He was fighting for every veteran and minority resident who had faced similar treatment. As the meeting dissolved into heated discussions and hurried consultations, Beverly Davis made her way to the parking lot, followed by a chorus of questions. From residents she had previously ruled over with impunity, the power dynamic had shifted and everyone could feel it. But this was just the beginning. What nobody in that room knew was that Usha Vance had only revealed a fraction of her evidence. She had saved the most damaging revelations for the legal proceedings to come. That evening, as the sun set over Oak Ridge Estates, Marcus sat on his front porch, the navy blue of his house standing proud against the darkening sky. Lisa Wallace joined him, notebook in hand, recording his thoughts for the story she was writing. "You know," Marcus said, looking out over the neighborhood he had fought so hard to call home, When I was in the Corps, we had a saying, sometimes. The hardest fights are the ones you never saw coming. Lisa nodded, understanding the weight of his words. And how does this fight compare to your military service? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. In the Marines, you know who your enemies are. Here it's different. Here, discrimination hides behind smiles and property values. But thanks to Miss Vance, it can't hide anymore. As night fell over Oak Ridge Estates, lights flickered on in windows across the neighborhood. In some homes, residents discussed the day's revelations in hushed, worried tones. In others, people finally felt brave enough to share their own stories of unfair treatment. In Beverly Davis's home, an emergency conference call with the HOA's legal team stretched into the night. The carefully constructed facade of proper procedure was crumbling, and with it, the power structure that had allowed discrimination to flourish under the guise of community standards. Usha worked late into the night in Marcus's dining room, preparing the legal documents that would transform this local struggle into a landmark case. She knew that what happened here could set a precedent for HOA reform across the country. But that's a story for our next chapter, where we'll see just how far Beverly Davis is willing to go to maintain control, and how Usha Vance's carefully laid trap is about to spring in a way that nobody, not even Marcus, could have anticipated. The next morning would bring new challenges, new revelations, and a confrontation that would change Oak Ridge Estates forever. Because sometimes the biggest changes in history start with one person standing up and saying no to injustice, even when that injustice comes wrapped in bylaws and property covenants. Before we continue this story, drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed discrimination hiding behind rules and regulations? How did you handle it? Your experiences matter, and they're part of the larger conversation we need to have about housing discrimination in America. Remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell to catch the next chapter, where we'll see just how this legal battle transforms into a movement that nobody saw coming. Sometimes the biggest changes start in the smallest places, and Oak Ridge Estates was about to become ground zero for a revolution in how HOAs operate across America. Stay tuned, because the real Bombshell is yet to come, and when it drops, it's going to change everything. Beverly Davis thought she was just fighting to maintain her control over one neighborhood. She had no idea she was about to become the catalyst for national reform. Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive into this explosive chapter, don't forget to drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's uncover what happens when Usha Vance pulls on the thread that unravels everything Beverly Davis tried to hide. The morning dawned gray and cold over Oak Ridge Estates, matching the mood that had settled over the community. In her home office, Usha Vance sat surrounded by stacks of documents, her eyes fixed on a series of emails that had arrived anonymously during the night. The contents made her blood run cold. "Mr. Thompson," she called out, her voice steady despite the gravity of what she'd discovered. "I think you need to see this." Marcus entered, coffee in hand, still maintaining his military precision even in casual clothes. The emails Usha had received weren't just about Oak Ridge Estates. They revealed a network of HOAs across 3 states, all connected through a consulting firm that specialized in what they euphemistically called community demographic management. "They've been doing this everywhere," Usha explained, spreading out a map marked with red pins indicating affected communities. Beverly Davis isn't just the president of this HOA. She's a regional consultant for Gateway Community Management, advising other associations on how to maintain property values through selective enforcement. Marcus studied the map, his tactical training kicking in as he recognized the pattern. They're targeting communities near military bases and areas with growing minority populations. Lisa Wallace, who had arrived early to continue her investigation, began photographing the documents. "This isn't just discrimination," she said, her journalist instincts firing. "This is organized, systematic exclusion disguised as property management." Across town, Beverly Davis was already in damage control mode. She sat at the head of a conference table at Gateway Community Management's regional office, surrounded by nervous executives and their increasingly concerned lawyers. Andrew Pierce, their longtime legal counsel, looked particularly uncomfortable as he reviewed the latest developments. "Ms. Davis," he began, choosing his words carefully, "the situation at Oak Ridge has become problematic. We need to discuss containment strategies." Beverly waved her hand dismissively. "It's one troublemaker with a clever lawyer. We've handled worse." But Chad Price, Gateway's regional director, wasn't so confident. "Beverly, they have the emails, all of them, including your consultancy reports on demographic shifting techniques." Meanwhile, back at Oak Ridge Estates, the community was experiencing its own shift. Catherine McGrath, who had lived there for 15 years, organized a meeting of concerned residents in her home. The gathering included both longtime homeowners and newer residents, all sharing stories of their experiences with the HOA's selective enforcement. "They cited me for my Christmas lights being up 2 days too long," Robert Simpson shared, "but the Andersons kept theirs up until March without a word." Deborah Kelly, an elderly resident, spoke up next. "When my grandson, who's African American, stayed with me last summer, I suddenly started getting violations for my garden. The same garden I've had for 12 years. As the stories poured out, a pattern emerged that matched exactly what Usha had discovered in the Gateway documents. It wasn't just about Marcus's house. It was about a calculated effort to shape the community's demographics through bureaucratic harassment. Back at Marcus's house, Usha was preparing for what would become the biggest case of her career. She worked methodically, building a RICO case that would expose not just individual acts of discrimination, but a nationwide enterprise of housing discrimination operating under the guise of property management. "The genius of it," she explained to Marcus and Lisa, "is how they've hidden everything in plain sight. Every violation, every fine, every rejection of property modifications, they all look legitimate on paper. But when you map them against demographic data," she pulled up a series of charts on her laptop, showing how enforcement patterns perfectly aligned with attempts to change neighborhood demographics. It was systematic, sophisticated, and entirely illegal. The evidence trail led to discoveries that shocked even Usha. Gateway Community Management had developed a proprietary software system that flagged high-risk homeowners, a designation that correlates suspiciously with race, military status, and other protected characteristics. The system recommended enhanced enforcement protocols for these residents, providing HOA boards with seemingly legitimate reasons to issue violations. David Smith, a former Gateway employee turned whistleblower, had provided crucial information about the company's internal operations. They called it community harmony maintenance, he revealed in a sworn statement. But it was really about giving HOAs the tools to push out residents they deemed undesirable. As Usha built her case, Beverly Davis was growing increasingly desperate. Her carefully constructed world was unraveling, and her attempts to maintain control were backfiring spectacularly. When she tried to call an emergency HOA meeting to discuss community security concerns, the residents instead used it as a forum to voice their grievances. Mary Ruiz, whose family had faced constant harassment since moving to Oak Ridge Estates, stood up during the meeting. "My children can't even play in our own backyard without getting a violation notice for excessive noise during quiet hours." Meanwhile, the Stevens family's kids have full baseball games in their yard every weekend. The meeting quickly spiraled out of Beverly's control. Eric Carrillo, a retired Army sergeant, presented documentation of how veterans' homes were subjected to more frequent property inspections than other residents. Timothy Roth, a real estate agent, revealed how he'd been pressured to guide certain buyers away from the community. But the real bombshell came when Paul Hansen, the HOA treasurer, who had earlier provided crucial evidence, revealed the financial side of Gateway's operations. The consulting firm had been skimming funds from HOA accounts through inflated management fees, using the money to finance their discriminatory enforcement programs. Lisa Wallace's article about the scandal was picked up by national media outlets. Suddenly, Oak Ridge Estates became the center of a nationwide conversation about housing discrimination and the abuse of HOA authority. Similar stories began emerging from communities across the country, all sharing the same pattern of Gateway's involvement. Usha's phone started ringing with calls from other attorneys representing similar cases. What had started as one veteran's fight for his home was transforming into a class action lawsuit that would reshape HOA governance across America. Marcus, watching it all unfold from his navy blue house, maintained his quiet dignity. But inside, he felt a familiar sensation, the same determination that had earned him his silver star. This was a different kind of battle, but the principles were the same: standing up against injustice, protecting the vulnerable, and fighting for what's right. The case took an unexpected turn when Jennifer Bell, a former Gateway executive, came forward with internal documents showing that the company had specifically targeted communities near military bases. The strategy was to create what they called pressure points, she explained to Usha. They knew service members would eventually rotate out to new assignments, so sustained harassment was seen as an effective tool for demographic control. Beverly Davis's world continued to crumble. Gateway Community Management, sensing the shifting winds, began distancing themselves from her. Andrew Pierce, their attorney, quietly began cooperating with Usha's investigation, hoping to minimize the firm's liability. The impact rippled through the community. Residents who had long stayed silent began speaking out. Michael Washington organized a community meeting to discuss forming a new HOA board, one that would represent all residents fairly. The atmosphere in Oak Ridge Estates was transforming from one of fear and conformity to one of unity and reform. Lisa Wallace's continued coverage brought national attention to the issue. Civil rights organizations began investigating similar patterns in other communities. Veterans groups rallied around Marcus's cause, seeing in his struggle a reflection of challenges faced by service members nationwide. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Isaiah Allen, a young black veteran who had been forced out of another Gateway-managed community, testified about his experience. His story perfectly matched the pattern Usha had uncovered, providing a human face to the statistical evidence of discrimination. As the case built momentum, Beverly Davis made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. She called a press conference, intending to paint herself as a victim of circumstance, a dedicated community leader being unfairly targeted. But her carefully crafted narrative crumbled under the weight of evidence Usha had assembled. The turning point came when Usha presented her findings to the Department of Justice. The systematic nature of Gateway's operations, the clear pattern of discrimination, and the financial fraud aspects of the case caught the attention of federal prosecutors. Marcus's navy blue house had become a symbol of resistance against discrimination, drawing supporters from across the country. Veterans groups organized a solidarity campaign, painting their own homes in similar shades of blue. The color that Beverly Davis had tried to ban became a nationwide symbol of standing up against housing discrimination. But while the national attention was important, the real change was happening within Oak Ridge Estates itself. Neighbors who had once viewed each other with suspicion began coming together. The community started holding regular gatherings in Marcus's garden, the same garden that had once been cited for violations. Kyle Arnold, a young resident who had initially supported Beverly's strict enforcement policies, had a change of heart after learning about the systematic discrimination. "I thought it was about maintaining standards," he admitted during a community meeting. "I never realized we were being used to push people out of their own homes." As federal investigators dug deeper into Gateway's operations, they uncovered a trail of evidence that led to similar operations across the country. What had started as one man's stand against an unjust HOA had exposed a nationwide network of housing discrimination. Usha worked tirelessly, coordinating with other attorneys and civil rights organizations to build a comprehensive case. The evidence was overwhelming. Thousands of pages of documents, emails, financial records, and testimony from former Gateway employees, all pointing to a systematic effort to use HOA regulations as a tool for discrimination. The impact of the case extended far beyond Oak Ridge Estates. State legislators began drafting bills to increase oversight of HOAs and property management companies. Civil rights organizations developed programs to help homeowners recognize and fight against discriminatory enforcement patterns. But for Marcus Sterling Thompson, the fight remained personal. Every morning, he would step out onto his porch, coffee in hand, and look at his navy blue house, a color that had come to represent so much more than just paint. It represented dignity, resilience, and the right to call a piece of America home. As this chapter of our story draws to a close, the stage is set for the final confrontation. Beverly Davis and Gateway Community Management are about to face the full force of federal prosecution, while Usha Vance prepares to present a case that will change HOA governance forever. But before we get to that explosive conclusion, drop a comment below. What color would you paint your house if you knew it would stand for something bigger than yourself? How would you use your home to make a statement about justice and equality? Stay tuned for our final chapter, where we'll see just how far the ripples of one man's stand against injustice can spread, and how sometimes the biggest changes in history start with something as simple as a coat of paint. Remember to like and subscribe to catch the finale of this incredible story. Sometimes the most important battles for civil rights aren't fought in courtrooms or on the streets, but in the quiet neighborhoods where discrimination tries to hide behind rules and regulations. Next time, we'll witness the final showdown between justice and discrimination as Usha Vance reveals the evidence that will bring down not just Beverly Davis, but an entire system of housing discrimination. The truth is about to come out, and nothing in Oak Ridge Estates or any HOA in America will ever be the same. Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive into this final explosive chapter, make sure to drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. The conclusion to this incredible story is about to unfold, and you won't believe how Usha Vance delivers the final blow to Beverly Davis's discriminatory empire. The morning of the federal hearing dawned clear and bright over the courthouse. Marcus Sterling Thompson stood at the bottom of the marble steps, his military bearing evident in his perfectly pressed suit. Around him, a sea of supporters had gathered, veterans in their service caps, families from Oak Ridge Estates, and residents from other Gateway-managed communities across the country. Inside her office, several blocks away, Usha Vance was making final preparations for what would become a landmark case in housing discrimination law. Spread across her desk were thousands of pages of evidence, each document a piece of the puzzle that would expose Gateway Community Management's systematic discrimination. "Ms. Vance," Marcus said, entering her office with Lisa Wallace beside him, "whatever happens today, I want you to know Usha held up her hand, a small smile playing at her lips. "Save it for after we win, Mr. Thompson. Today we're not just fighting for your house, we're fighting for every veteran and minority, homeowner who's ever been told they don't belong." Across town, Beverly Davis sat in Gateway's corporate headquarters, surrounded by a team of high-priced attorneys. The confident smile she'd worn for years had finally cracked, revealing the worry beneath. Andrew Pierce, their former counsel, turned state's witness, had provided prosecutors with decades of internal communications that laid bare the company's discriminatory practices. "It's not too late to settle," Chad Price, Gateway's regional director, suggested nervously. "We could offer Thompson a deal." "No!" Beverly snapped, her manicured nails drumming against the mahogany conference table. "We've done nothing wrong. Everything we did was within the bylaws." But even as she spoke those words, Beverly knew they rang hollow. The evidence Usha had assembled went far beyond simple bylaw enforcement. It revealed a calculated, systematic effort to use HOA regulations as weapons of discrimination. The courthouse was packed as the hearing began. Judge Catherine Morrow, known for her no-nonsense approach to civil rights cases, surveyed the crowded gallery. On one side sat Marcus, Usha, and their supporters. On the other, Beverly Davis and Gateway's legal team looked increasingly uncomfortable. Usha rose to present her opening statement, her voice clear and confident. "Your Honor, this case is about more than house paint or garden regulations. It's about a sophisticated system of housing discrimination hiding behind the facade of community standards." For the next hour, she methodically laid out the evidence. First came the statistical analysis, showing how Gateway's enhanced enforcement protocols disproportionately targeted minority homeowners and veterans. Then came the internal emails, revealing how Beverly Davis had helped develop and implement these discriminatory practices across multiple states. Gateway didn't just violate civil rights law, Usha explained, displaying a series of damning documents on the courtroom screens. They turned discrimination into a business model, selling their community demographic management services to HOAs across the country. The evidence was overwhelming. Former Gateway employees testified about the company's targeting algorithms. Financial records revealed how they profited from excessive fines levied against undesirable residents. Internal training materials showed how HOA boards were taught to use seemingly neutral regulations to achieve discriminatory goals. Beverly Davis watched her carefully constructed world crumble as witness after witness took the stand. Paul Hansen testified about how the Oak Ridge Estates HOA board had been trained to apply different standards to different residents. Timothy Roth revealed how real estate agents were pressured to guide certain buyers away from Gateway-managed communities. But the most powerful testimony came from the victims themselves. Isaiah Allen described how Gateway's harassment had forced him to sell his home at a loss. Mary Ruiz shared how her children had been targeted with selective enforcement of noise regulations. Michael Washington detailed the subtle but persistent discrimination he'd faced as a successful black professional in a Gateway community. Throughout it all, Marcus sat quietly, his presence a reminder of what the fight was really about. The right to call a piece of America home, regardless of who you are or how you served your country. The turning point came when Usha presented evidence of Gateway's financial fraud. The company hadn't just discriminated, they'd profited from it, skimming millions from HOA accounts through inflated management fees and selective enforcement fines. "Your Honor," Usha said, her voice carrying the weight of justice, Gateway didn't just break civil rights laws. They built an entire business around helping HOAs exclude people based on race and veteran status, all while illegally profiting from their discrimination. During a brief recess, Lisa Wallace updated her ongoing coverage of the case. Her articles had already sparked investigations of similar practices in other states. Civil rights organizations were using Gateway's methods as a template for identifying hidden discrimination in other HOAs. Back in the courtroom, Beverly Davis's testimony proved to be her undoing. Under Usha's skillful cross-examination, her carefully maintained facade cracked. When confronted with her own emails describing strategies for maintaining neighborhood character, a documented euphemism for demographic control, Beverly's true attitudes became clear. "We were protecting property values," Beverly insisted, her voice rising. "These people—" She caught herself, but it was too late. The mask had slipped, revealing the prejudice beneath. Judge Morrow's ruling was unequivocal. Gateway Community Management was found guilty of systematic civil rights violations, ordered to pay millions in damages, and barred from managing HOAs. Beverly Davis and other key executives faced criminal charges for fraud and civil rights violations, but the impact of the case reached far beyond one company or community. The judge's ruling established new precedents for identifying and prosecuting hidden housing discrimination. HOAs across the country would now face greater scrutiny and accountability. In Oak Ridge Estates, the changes were immediate and dramatic. The old HOA board was dissolved, replaced by a diverse group of residents committed to fair and transparent governance. Michael Washington was elected as the new board president, with John McCarthy serving as vice president. Marcus's navy blue house, once a symbol of defiance, became a landmark of change. Veterans and minority residents in other communities began challenging discriminatory HOA practices, often citing the Thompson precedent established by Usha's victory. The story caught national attention. Civil rights organizations developed new tools for identifying and fighting HOA discrimination based on the patterns Usha had exposed. Veterans groups established legal defense funds to help service members facing similar battles. 1 month after the ruling, Oak Ridge Estates held a community celebration in Marcus's garden. The once cited non-conforming vegetation had become a gathering place for neighbors who had finally learned to see past their differences. "You know what the real victory is," Marcus said to Usha as they watched children of all backgrounds playing together on his lawn. "It's not just about winning in court, it's about changing hearts and minds." Lisa Wallace, still documenting the community's transformation, captured the moment when Beverly Davis's replacement real estate signs were taken down throughout the neighborhood. The new signs featured a rainbow of house colors and the slogan, "All heroes welcome here." The impact rippled beyond housing. State legislators began drafting bills requiring HOAs to undergo civil rights training and maintain transparent enforcement records. The Thompson Act would later become model legislation for HOA reform across the country. Even Andrew Pierce, the former Gateway attorney, found redemption in helping other communities identify and eliminate discriminatory practices. Sometimes, he admitted in a national interview, it takes seeing the system from the inside to understand how deeply wrong it is. The case became a cornerstone of civil rights law education. Law schools began using Usha's strategy as a case study in how to expose and fight systematic discrimination. Her methodical approach to uncovering Gateway's practices became a template for civil rights attorneys nationwide. Back in Oak Ridge Estates, the changes were more personal. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now gathered for weekly community events. The garden citations were replaced by a community gardening program. The once rigid color restrictions gave way to a vibrant palette of homes reflecting their owners' personalities and cultures. 6 months after the ruling, Marcus hosted a barbecue for the neighborhood. Veterans in their service caps mingled with families of all backgrounds. Children played on the lawn that had once been subject to endless violations. The air was filled with the sound of laughter and music in multiple languages. Beverly Davis, awaiting trial on criminal charges, drove past the celebration. The sight of the diverse, happy community that had replaced her vision of proper neighborhood standards was perhaps the most fitting punishment of all. Usha Vance's law practice transformed too. She became a leading expert in fighting institutional discrimination, helping other communities identify and challenge similar practices. But she never forgot the case that started it all: a navy blue house and a veteran who refused to back down. The final chapter of this story isn't really an ending at all. It's a beginning. Across America, communities began examining their HOA practices, asking hard questions about who their rules really served. The ripples from Marcus's stand against injustice continued to spread, touching lives far beyond Oak Ridge estates. 1 year after the ruling, Marcus added a new plaque beside his Silver Star display. This one commemorated not military victory, but a different kind of courage. The courage to stand up for what's right, even when it means standing alone. The navy blue house still stands in Oak Ridge Estates, its color no longer a symbol of defiance, but of victory. It reminds everyone who passes that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest stands against injustice. As for Usha Vance, she keeps a photo on her office wall. Marcus's house, gleaming navy blue in the sunlight, with the diverse community gathered on its lawn. It reminds her that justice sometimes wears unexpected colors, and that the fight for equality happens not just in courtrooms, but in the everyday spaces where we live our lives. Before we end this incredible journey, drop a comment below. What fight for justice would you be willing to take on in your community? How would you use your voice to stand up against discrimination? Remember to like and subscribe to stay updated on more stories of justice prevailing against all odds. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that one person's stand for what's right can change the world. Because in the end, this story isn't just about a house color or an HOA. It's about the ongoing fight for equality and justice in America, fought not on battlefields or in grand halls of power, but in neighborhoods just like yours, by people just like you who decide to stand up and say, "This isn't right, and I'm going to do something about it." Thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember, the next chapter of justice might just start with you. Hey everyone, the response to this story has been incredible, and so many of you asked about what happened next. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and let's dive into the remarkable aftermath of Usha Vance's landmark victory and how it continues to transform communities across America. 5 years after the Gateway case, Marcus Sterling, Thompson's navy blue house had become more than just a symbol. It was a beacon of hope for communities fighting discrimination nationwide. But the story didn't end with the court victory. The ripples of change continued to spread in ways that no one, not even Usha Vance, could have predicted. On a crisp autumn morning, much like the one when this story began, Marcus stood in his garden, now a flourishing community space where neighbors gathered regularly. The once controversial flowers had multiplied into a stunning display that attracted visitors from across the state. But more impressive than the blooms were the changes that had taken root in Oak Ridge Estates and beyond. Michael Washington, the new HOA president, had transformed the association into a model of inclusive governance. The community's previous rules and regulations underwent a complete overhaul, with every policy examined through the lens of equity and fairness. The new bylaws, dubbed the Thompson Standards, were being adopted by HOAs across the country. "It's not just about preventing discrimination," Michael explained to a group of visiting community leaders. "It's about actively building inclusive communities where everyone has a voice." The impact of the case continued to reverberate through the legal system. Usha Vance's methodical approach to exposing systematic discrimination became known as the Vance method in legal circles. Law schools added the case to their civil rights curriculum, with Usha frequently guest lecturing about how to identify and challenge institutional discrimination. Lisa Wallace's coverage of the story had earned her a Pulitzer Prize nomination, but more importantly, it had sparked a national conversation about hidden discrimination in housing. Her investigative series, Colors of Exclusion, revealed similar patterns in communities across America, leading to investigations and reforms in hundreds of HOAs. Beverly Davis's trial had become a watershed moment in civil rights enforcement. Found guilty on multiple counts of fraud and civil rights violations, she was sentenced to federal prison. But the real punishment was watching everything she had built crumble as communities embraced the very diversity she had fought to exclude. The Thompson Act, inspired by the case, had passed in 12 states, requiring HOAs to undergo regular civil rights audits and maintain transparent enforcement records. The legislation included provisions for protecting veteran homeowners, ensuring their service-related accommodations couldn't be used as grounds for discrimination. Paul Hansen, the former HOA treasurer whose conscience had helped break the case, now ran a consulting firm helping communities transition to inclusive governance models. The old way of doing things wasn't just wrong, he often said in his presentations. It was robbing communities of their greatest strength, their diversity. John McCarthy, the retired Air Force colonel, had established the Veterans Housing Rights Initiative, a nationwide organization providing legal support to service members facing housing discrimination. The organization's logo featured a navy blue house, a tribute to where it all began. The impact extended beyond policy changes. Real estate agents received mandatory training in fair housing practices, with the Gateway case serving as a primary example of how seemingly neutral policies could mask systematic discrimination. Andrew Pierce, the former Gateway attorney, became a leading voice in corporate ethics, teaching companies how to identify and eliminate discriminatory practices. Isaiah Allen, who had testified about being forced out of his home, returned to his former community as a homeowner advocate. His story, combined with Marcus's victory, inspired a movement of resistance against discriminatory housing practices. "We're not just fighting for houses," he would say at community meetings. "We're fighting for the right to belong." The transformation of Oak Ridge Estates itself was remarkable. The community had become known for its vibrant diversity, with homes reflecting various cultural influences. The annual community festival, held in Marcus's garden, drew visitors from across the country who wanted to see how a neighborhood could reinvent itself. Mary Ruiz's children, once cited for excessive noise, now led the Community Youth Council, organizing events that brought families together across cultural boundaries. The sound of children playing had replaced the silence of enforced conformity, creating a neighborhood alive with energy and joy. The financial impact of the case continued to unfold. Gateway's collapse led to the exposure of similar companies engaging in discriminatory practices. A nationwide audit of property management firms revealed a pattern of systematic discrimination that had gone unchallenged for decades. The resulting reforms transformed the industry, with new companies emerging that specialized in promoting inclusive community development. Timothy Roth, the real estate agent who had exposed Gateway's pressure tactics, established an agency dedicated to fair housing practices. His firm's commitment to transparency and equality set new standards for the industry, proving that ethical practices could be good business. Usha Vance's legal career soared, but she never lost touch with the community that had started it all. She maintained an office in Oak Ridge Estates, providing pro bono legal services to residents facing discrimination. Her work expanded beyond housing rights to address various forms of institutional discrimination, always using the lessons learned. From Marcus's case, the navy blue house became a sort of unofficial landmark. Civil rights groups organized tours, bringing activists from across the country to learn about the case and its impact. Marcus, ever the gracious host, would share his story with visitors, always emphasizing that the victory belonged not to him alone, but to everyone who had stood up for what was right. Catherine McGrath's community meetings evolved into a nationwide network of neighborhood advocacy groups. The Community Colors Initiative helped residents challenge discriminatory practices while promoting inclusive neighborhood development. The organization's handbook, Beyond Beige: Building Inclusive Communities, became a blueprint for HOA reform. The impact on veterans' rights was particularly significant. The case had exposed how HOAs often used seemingly neutral regulations to discriminate against service members, leading to new federal protections for veteran homeowners. Military bases across the country now provided housing rights education as part of transition services, using the Gateway case as a warning and the Thompson victory as a model for resistance. Eric Carrillo, the retired Army sergeant who had testified about veterans' discrimination, established a mentoring program connecting military families with housing advocates. The program helped service members navigate the complicated world of HOAs while ensuring their rights were protected. The transformation extended to property values, challenging the fundamental assumption that had driven Gateway's discriminatory practices. Oak Ridge Estate's property values had increased significantly, proving that diversity and inclusion could enhance rather than harm community value. Economic studies of the Thompson effect showed that inclusive communities consistently outperformed those clinging to outdated restrictive practices. David Smith, the Gateway whistleblower, found redemption in helping other corporate insiders expose discriminatory practices. His testimony before Congress led to stronger protections for employees who reported civil rights violations, making it easier for others to come forward. The case's impact on legal education was profound. Law. Schools developed new curricula focusing on identifying and challenging systematic discrimination. The Vance method became required reading, teaching future lawyers how to expose discrimination hidden behind seemingly neutral policies. Lisa Wallace's ongoing coverage revealed how the case had inspired a new generation of civil rights activists. Young lawyers, community organizers, and homeowners were using the lessons from Oak Ridge Estates to challenge discrimination in their own communities. The navy blue house had become a symbol of resistance against injustice in all its forms. The national conversation about HOAs and property rights underwent a fundamental shift. Communities began questioning the balance between maintaining standards and ensuring equality. The focus moved from enforcement to engagement, from restriction to inclusion. Marcus's garden, once a battleground for HOA enforcement, became a living classroom where community groups learned about inclusive development. The flowers that Beverly Davis had tried to eliminate now bloomed alongside plants from various cultural traditions, creating a vibrant tapestry that reflected the community's diversity. The annual Thompson Community Fair drew thousands, celebrating the victory of inclusion over exclusion. The event featured homes of all colors, gardens of all styles, and people of all backgrounds coming together to show what a truly inclusive community could achieve. Before we end this final chapter, drop a comment below sharing how this story has inspired you to make changes in your own community. What colors would you fight for? What stands would you take? Remember to like and subscribe for more stories of justice and transformation. Share this video with anyone who needs inspiration to stand up against discrimination in their own community, because In the end, the story of the navy blue house isn't just about one man's victory or one lawyer's brilliance. It's about the power of standing up for what's right, the importance of community, and the endless ripples that one act of courage can create. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. Remember, wherever you are, whatever color your house might be, you have the power to stand up for justice and make a difference in your community. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories of courage and change. Until next time, keep fighting for what's right and never let anyone tell you that you don't belong.